everybody. Welcome to the 10 Laws podcast with East Forest. I'm East Forest. Thanks for joining me today. Today, I have an episode with Sophia Rokhlin. Sophia is an author and speaker, a nonprofit organizer from New York City. She says on her website that she's engaged in botany and ecology, but she's bridging the worlds of indigenous ecological knowledge and Western science. She is the program coordinator at the Chaikuni Institute and currently directs the Sustainable Ayahuasca Cultivation Program at the Temple of the Way of Light, which is a traditional plant medicine retreat in the Amazon in Peru. And she also co-authored the book When Plants Dream, Ayahuasca, Amazonian Shamanism, and the Global Psychedelic Renaissance, which I believe Daniel Pinchbeck was the other co-author of that book. And she's a really cool woman, and does have this unique perspective on ayahuasca, both in its indigenous traditional use and the science behind it. And I really wanted to bring her on board to talk about that world, her world, and how this relates to our world and this ever-present change that we are in. So I'm sure you're really going to enjoy this conversation, and I'm very happy that Sophia could join us. If you haven't gotten a chance, I released 3 meditations, guided meditations on the streaming platforms like Spotify and Apple Music, Amazon, and all those things. They are meditations that I've released here on the podcast, but I remixed them and had them remastered by Taylor Dupree and put them into a 6-song little album called Still. And you can go see it now. And really, if you've already heard them, a great way to support is to share them. Share them with your friends and family or community on social media. And thanks to everyone who has done that. It's been awesome. And it's great to make something here by myself that I'm essentially speaking to myself, a kind of meditation, and then watch our shared human soul experience, see it mirrored in everyone else who's, walking their own walk. But we're all facing really similar feelings. And I know right now, I don't know about you, but the past week has felt like energy is up and a bit of a fire. And maybe that has something to do with this little pandemic we're in. But, we're changing seasons. And when you sense that, you're sensing a changing of time. And when time is shifting and we're moving through time, it creates pause in us where we're like, wait a minute, how do I match this up against expectations that perhaps I had about the last time this happened a year ago? And certainly right now is different. And man, I just keep going through this feeling like we're doing a dance of being in the world while also cultivating a completely new being. And this new way of being in the world is something that we have to have patience with because it is emerging. And that opportunity, I believe, is there for all of us. But, we have to step into it as we're ready and as we're able. And I was speaking to my friend Morning Altars yesterday on the phone, and we were reminding ourselves of sort of the analogy about bread. And for bread to rise, it needs yeast, which is a very small additive. And this is also something Court Johnson, VCJ, would say to me. Yeast is a small additive. And so on the planet itself, we don't need everybody, essentially, to wake up, quote unquote. That would be great. But we really just need a certain small number of people. I mean, it's millions of people, but comparatively to the billions on this planet, maybe if we had, I don't know what that number is, but maybe if it was 10 million or something, there's a threshold we can cross where it's enough for it to rise, for the bread to rise, for this planet to rise, for us to thread the needle into our future. And it is happening. No one knows what the future will hold. And I think we have more trials and tribulations to contend with. But I know in my own life, I can see the opportunities, the gift and the bitter medicine of this experience. And it's not something that I see and then I just turn it on and there I am the next day. It's more like I have to keep walking and allowing and listening. It's a midwifing process that I can't always speed up, but I can help it by blessing it. And so that's what we have to do. So thanks again for the support. Thanks for reviewing this podcast. If you can get a moment to do that, if you're on Apple Podcasts, and if you're not, or whatever way you're listening to this, thank you for those of you who share it online and tag at East Forest on Instagram and at East Forest Music on Facebook and Twitter. It's just a great way for to help continue this tradition and for us to continue our work together as a community. All right, let's dive into this. This is my conversation with the wonderful Sophia Rokhlin. Thank you so much for joining us. I've seen your name bouncing around in some of the circles that we cross over in, and I was grateful that you're willing to come on and share a bit about your world. I know you recently completed a book with our friend Daniel Pinchbeck, right?
This is true. Yeah.
Yeah. I met Daniel here in this little town I'm in 10 years ago at a tiny conference, a reality sandwich conference, the first one they did in 2008. And I ended up essentially getting land here and still coming.
Right on.
But that's when that whole funny enough, his book, Breaking Open the Head, was one of the first sort of spiritual books that I read when I was first just sort of having my own head broke open. And in the back of it, it just had the website Reality Sandwich. And that led to me coming here, which led to me meeting so-and-so, yada, yada, yada. So.
Oh, wow. So it really is like a full elliptical movement for you.
I owe him a little bit. I do.
Yeah.
I do.
He's like a major connector in that way, that guy. He's in my life and in other people's lives, I've just seen he has this like tentacular kind of capacity to like connect people to different walks of life. Very cool. That's awesome.
Yeah. So can you tell us just a little bit about yourself, speaking of connecting dots, and how you got from what I'm guessing was not growing up in any sort of shamanic traditions to where you are today, writing books with Daniel Pinchbeck and being an advocate and diving into the spaces that you're diving into?
Sure. Yeah. Well, you are right on. I did not grow up with a shamanic background. I am a child of our modern metropolis, Babylon, born and raised in New York City, to two immigrant parents in Brooklyn, born and raised in Brooklyn.
I was in Dumbo for 10 years, so I'm just curious.
Oh, great. So I was, in Brooklyn Heights. So
Brooklyn Heights,
near the
right
Fruit
there.
Streets. It's a very quaint, beautiful area there. Yeah. So yeah, you can tell it's not too much of like a neo-shamanic counterculture over there. Yeah. I mean, these days, who knows? But and then I guess my whole, there's so many different ways to like look at it. And when I look at my life retrospectively, it's like I create new narratives about how I became who I am. But I guess for today, I look at it like I felt very intensely a void or a vacuum of meaning, basically. Everywhere I looked, or everywhere I attempted, to find answers, I found nothing. I felt like I grew up in a vacuum of meaning. So, people would grow up, they would go to college, they get a job, internship, it seemed like a terrifyingly linear trajectory that I was on, all the while, as a young girl, noticing our like woeful disconnection from nature and just so clearly seeing like, oh boy, we are pedal to the metal, accelerating towards Lord knows what, but it doesn't look good on the other end of it.
What was your connection to nature growing up in Brooklyn Heights? Did you guys get out a lot as a family, or?
Not too much. I mean, I was lucky. My dad had a house in the country, actually in the Catskills, so I would spend my summers there. And the kind of like rural area. So I never considered myself like a nature child or anything, but I am an only child. So I've found that I was always looking for friendship and for company in all living beings. It's kind of like sort of healing my own sense of solitude with creating kinship with the animals and the plants and the mosses. I remember always having like a super magical relationship to the moss family. So, yeah, I definitely wouldn't have predicted I would be like a plant person, but that's what it is today. Wow.
And then did you go to school? And where did the intersection of the psychedelic landscape come into your life? Because for me, my first experience was in college, actually in Poughkeepsie. And
oh, cool. Right on.
Yeah. And then I had my first breaking open of that head when I was 19. And thankfully, it was positive. But it was profound. And I didn't have any understanding of what had happened or what that state was. I had no elders. I had no tradition to lean on. I'd never even really... No one had spoken to that with any grace in my life, ever. It was just sort of like the memes we all hear about psychedelic states being crazy or wacky or silly. But I was like, this was way beyond that. It was with psilocybin.
Unlanguageably deep.
Right. Yeah, right. Yeah. And it felt so important and powerful that I wanted others to experience it, like my parents and stuff. I was like, it felt like I was connecting to something that was original. And
how
that
did
we
that
all
go? Did you evangelize them?
Sure, you're in college. But over the years, they've opened up more and more to it. But I'm sure I didn't know what I was talking about. Not that I know now, but when I was talking to Ram Dass, working on a record with him, he said that psilocybin started him on his spiritual path. And that's a pretty big statement. To say that experience, his first experience with psilocybin, he became Ram Dass. Like his entire life unfolded because of that. And it's what he's saying. Was there something like that for you?
It was nothing like that for me. It was nothing like that for me. I had always felt very comfortable in altered states of consciousness. And by that, I mean like holding my breath for a really long time until I passed out. Or, I found myself always like gravitating towards these strange behaviors. And as a kid, I was drawn into acting. I realized that, I had this sensibility or this impulse to transform, right? Acting, in a sense, is a sort of shamanic act where you are communicating and conjuring and translating the ineffable, the eternal, to a temporal kind of audience and in a liminal space. So you're like, in between two worlds, really. So I was a child actor for a while, and then the industry like squashed me, as it does, and. But from there, I mean, the actual encounters with psychedelics were mostly with LSD when I was a young, like a teen, 15, 16, and they were fairly traumatic, actually. I got the crap beat out of me by my best friend at the time on
like, literally?
Unknowable. Yeah. We were at some guy's house, and he was at his mom's house, and he had a whole dresser drawer full of unnameable, unknown substances. And he just dropped out like a whole dropper onto a sugar cube for me and my friend. We were like,
who is this guy? What is?
Yeah, I know. Who is this
just
guy?
the kids.
That's
crazy.
I think he was a kid too. And the whole world turned into an Escher painting, and we couldn't tell up from down. And she had a lot of trauma and fear, and she freaked out. And so I was probably on 1,000 micrograms, just getting the life punched out of me.
I'm sorry.
So that's an initiation. Yeah. And to this day, actually, LSD itself isn't quite like, I feel like the morphogenetic field of it is a bit... it resonates with that kind of energy still for me.
Right.
Yeah. So anyway, I went deep for you there.
So how did we get from those sort of really traumatic experiences, still in New York City as an adolescent, moving into where it really felt more like a life path?
Yeah. Right. Because you would think an experience like that is enough to never go back. But
I bet it gave you an important pause in a way. Like...
I think so. It's kind of like, I don't know if you've heard the term mysterium tremendum, the great awe, the unspeakable awfulness of something. It's this like tremendously beautiful and terrifying thing. I think looking back, that's definitely what I had seen in those moments, even though they were marred in violence and fear. I saw that there was like tremendous light and mystery on the other side of that. And yeah, I mean, I guess really started working with entheogens, or the sort of plant teacher realms, started during Occupy Wall Street, when I had met a group of Native American elders there who were praying at a protest. And, as a younger person, you don't really think of those two things related, right? You think of protest as some sort of a violent, rageful act, and not something that's infused with intention and prayer and attention. And speaking with them and connecting with them, I learned pretty quickly that they had plants who were sort of the focal point of their traditions and their faith, and the umbilical cord that connected the present to the past. And from there, I realized that plants were, I had the feeling that plants were conduits to other states of perception and connection. And ultimately, it's always been connection for me, that I've been looking for connection to place, connection to people, connection to land. And so plants were sort of these intermediary vessels that were teachers and conduits to feeling whole.
I see.
Yeah.
And ayahuasca itself, just to tie things back to Daniel, because this is also true. The first time I had heard about ayahuasca was in about 2007 or so. It was a Rolling Stone article about him. And it basically said, like, there's this thing called ayahuasca that's starting to go around circles in New York and around the world. And it was about him wearing an eye shade and a diaper and a bucket in a Brooklyn apartment. And I remember thinking to myself, like, that's the worst, like, endorsement or like the sale of like a product. Is like, I'm never doing that. And sure enough, a year or so later, someone's inviting me upstate to work with some Peruvian shamans, and it was a different story. It's still involved. I didn't have a diaper, but I
yeah, that's what I wanted to ask.
I don't know if anybody does the diaper thing anymore, but
I don't know if that was like a literary flair too that he added.
I have a feeling there's a little sensationalism in that article. Yeah, for sure. Because I'm sure the writer hadn't maybe indulged. So they were just stunned by what was happening. But for myself, that was a powerful moment, the first experience with that. And it was a very seminal, like strong, kind of classic experience that was very, very eye-opening for me into that medicine. And psilocybin has been more of a teacher for myself over the years, and an ally as a creative person, and just in my life, whether or not I'm ingesting it much, which I don't. But it's been profound in my life. And it sounds like for you, did you do some shifts in your life where you started to dedicate more of your time, focus, and energy and professional energy into in service to the plants?
Yeah, for sure. I mean,
where did that come from, that decision?
Well, yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think for me, working with ayahuasca is kind of my keystone dude. It's like my go-to. The potion that I've, it's two plants. We talk about ayahuasca like it's one plant very often, but it's actually two. But generally ayahuasca, which is a very diverse tradition with many different ingredients and ways of, actually having a ceremony. That's kind of my go-to. And what happened for me was I went to the Ecuadorian Amazon on my 20th birthday. And I had gone because I had a connection through a friend of a friend of a friend. I remember having a little piece of a notebook torn off and at hotmail.com email written on it. And they were like, you got to contact this person. Looking back, I think it was kind of dumb, but I remember going into Barnes and Noble and sitting on the floor and looking at the travel guides and writing down the name of a a travel lodge that I could tell my parents I was going to. I told them I went to like a butterfly resort or something.
Where were you going?
Well, I ended up going deep into the northeastern Ecuadorian Amazon, on the border of Colombia and Peru over there, in a region which is more famously known for its prostitution, alcoholism, and oil extraction. And today, palm oil extraction. So major, mega agricultural projects going on over there. But that region is home to over 100 distinct ethnic communities over there. They're mostly in Tucano-speaking peoples. And that region was devastated in 1964 and onwards by an oil spill, which was basically the fault of Chevron, which was then called Texaco. And so those communities have very beautiful and profound and deep traditions with what they call yahe, which is kind of like the northern version of ayahuasca. Different cosmovision, different preparation, but more or less the same idea. And so I went there kind of fancying myself like a young ethnobotanist or anthropologist. You know, I wanted to go meet the people and see the land and understand things. And it was not like a comfortable situation whatsoever. People live in very small hamlets. It's a very, tricky drive. And yeah, I guess long story short, basically in the deepest hypnagogic, psychedelic states of my life, I felt myself transforming into oil. I felt the ridges of my brain being filled with black petroleum, and the articulations in my body were these like little joints, these like machine-like cogs, and I physiologically and physically and spiritually felt the pain of industrialization in my body. And from there, I could never divorce the psychedelic experience working with plants from our necessity to be stewards of the earth and to protect these plants. And so that's pretty much how I've been walking my path from there on for the past 7 years. I've been in and out of the jungle and fundraising to support indigenous communities and supporting the traditions of their languages, continuing planting ayahuasca, which is becoming a bit of an issue, over cultivation, permaculture solutions and alternatives to slash and burn deforestation, and then working at an ayahuasca retreat center called the Temple of the Way of Light, which is the Shipibo traditional medicine center. So that's how the path has unfolded.
Was that first place you went, were those Sequoia elders?
Yeah, exactly. Sequoia. Wow. Or they call themselves Secopai. Mm-hmm.
Tintin.
Yeah. Tintin. Do you know Tintin?
Not personally, but without getting too much into it, they've worked with two of my friends. So the two times, or the one time that I know of that they came to the States was at my friend's place. And my other friend, in this neck of the woods, is gone taking groups down there. He's a big with that whole world, that group,
with that crew.
So I know also Rodrigo. And,
you do?
He actually made this ring. This is Rodrigo's work.
Oh my gosh! Wow.
So that's he's a brother.
That's so funny.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness! So Rodrigo like shepherded me into this world with a big time.
Can I tell you a Rodrigo story?
If you want, go for it.
It's not too long, but it's kind of comical. He was doing a
cigarette dangling out of his mouth, right?
No. So there was a ceremony that I was a sitter for, and he was doing the work in the ceremony, and it was just intense. And he's kind of intense, in my opinion, in his style. The music's just kind of da 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 da. There's no softness to go around. There's no doorway. He's just like, this is it. We're doing this, and here's the rattle. Here's the song, and people are really, really going through it. And I was doing my best to take the moniker of like, don't do too much. Do as little as I can. I remember him saying like, he came over to me. He's like, grab this person and like basically spoon them and cuddle them. Like, that's what they need right now. And I said, okay. So I'm just doing whatever he asked me to do.
Interesting.
And at one point, maybe 3-4 hours into it, he just goes, he just left. Like he went to the bathroom or something. Or he went on this lazy boy and just put a blanket over himself. So now there's nothing happening and everyone's still in it. And I was like, he knew that I do some work with music and in ceremony. So I was like, I guess I'll take over for a few minutes. So I kind of picked up a flute. I played for a while, and then he's still in the chair. So I'm like, okay. I picked up some gong and I did some gong work, and then he's still out. So it went on for a while. I basically just kept playing because I was like, I can't leave these people hanging. And after a while, I felt a little weird. It's like, I haven't gotten the full green light here. So I think we're just going to have some silence for a while.
I stay in my lane, yeah.
Yeah, I did it for like 45 minutes. And then I sat down and people were starting to calm down. And I was actually really grateful because I thought, it's really late. This has been really intense. I think we're done. And we're just going to like let things get soft and go to sleep. Yeah. And that lasted for about an hour. And then all of a sudden, about 2 a.m, the blanket flies off him. He bursts out of the chair, grabs the rattle, and just starts going at it again, full speed.
Oh, and everybody goes back in.
And we're all... And I love him to death. I really do. But I just remember that night. I just like, that was so intense. He's like, there were some strong energies we had to deal with. And I was like, okay.
I just had a funny moment. Did you give him an album of yours?
Yeah, probably. He and I were hanging, and I did.
Because when I was at his house in Quito, that's the first time I heard your music.
No shit. Oh my God.
Yeah, I remember looking at that album.
He took it to Peru. That's amazing. Or Ecuador.
Cool. Yeah. In Ecuador, exactly, in Quito. So that album.
Amazing.
And that's
amazing.
Wow. Huh. That is so funny.
Yeah, well, tell him hi. He comes through here to
First you tell me hi.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, amazing, because I know that tradition is like in hammocks and in sort of like a lodge with fires. Right. It's a little different, and you go all night. And is there a connection with them and deep in their lineage, do you know, and sort of off-planet life, sort of like alien visitation or UFO stuff, anything like that? Because I've heard people talk about that in the ceremonies.
Yeah.
They're like, dude, we were visiting.
So what I like to do is kind of ground any of these like astral projections in some material chemical knowledge. So
great. Love it.
An interesting way to distinguish the Peruvian, the Shipibo brews and the Secopai or the Tucano, the northern brews, is the admixture that they use. So they'll use a Banisteriopsis capi vine, and then the Sequoia tend to use Diplopteris cabrerana, which is a different plant than the Secotria viridis. So both of them contain DMT, but again, I mean, each of these plants are like a divine composition of different beta carbolines and different alkaloids, and they just have their own chemical signatures. So and so not only is there that difference in the actual plant that they're using, but the way that the Sequoia tend to prepare the mixture is by rasping the bark off of the vine, which makes it less purgative, because in the vine itself, there are more what you call emetic tannins. So it makes you vomit more. So the Sequoia brew, in theory, will have you vomit much less than a Shipibo brew. And in theory, if you are letting this brew, this DMT concoction, metabolize deeper and deeper and deeper into your system without actually purging it, you could be elevating higher and higher and higher and getting deeper and deeper and deeper into these realms. So we often see with like the Sequoia motifs and drawings, they are much more astral and cosmic versus the Shipibo, which are much more terrestrial and earthly. So having said that, I mean, I do know that the Sequoia themselves, they call them the Nanye Secopai, like the rainbow people, the Rainbow River people. And these are kind of like the entities that connect, that bridge their world and the celestial sphere. But absolutely, it's kind of like their cosmovision is situated in this sort of a it's like a super terrestrial plane. It sounds like you have some
it's
intimation.
A yes. No, that's fascinating.
I'm done riffing on that. But yeah, so it is interesting how the different actual botanical concoctions and combinations can have different journeys, can bring you on different spells.
Well, I would assume they're mixing in other plants into the brew as well.
Sometimes. I mean, I think that as far as I know, and again, I'm not an expert on sequoia medicine, I think they keep it pretty clean. They keep it pretty simple.
Don't you spend the first... You do a lot of purgative with tobacco or something for a couple days to start?
With the sequoia? So no. Again, what I know is that they sometimes use yahe oko, which is like just a Banisteriopsis copy without the DMT, or vice versa. So they'll just prepare a kind of a watery, liquidy brew, really that is just meant to be a purgative without that strong kind of DMT punch. And usually, like any of these tobacco purges they typically should be done under the supervision of a professional, like a real, a healer who has done a lot of work with it. And it shouldn't, in my humble opinion, it shouldn't be done by novices. Like tobacco is a very powerful plant, and it really helps to have some experience dieting and fasting before dancing with the master on that one. Get your butt kicked.
Yeah. What do you think about?
In many cases, we've seen like the so-called ayahuasca deaths actually being tobacco deaths. So
tell me more about that. From the toxicity of it, or you're talking about the power of the plant spiritually, or both?
Well, maybe they're the same, right? It's like when you look at illness in this, let's say from the Shipibo perspective, because again, Shipibo are a population of about 35,000 people that live between Peru and Brazil, and they've kind of become like the celebrities of global ayahuasca. They're kind of their artwork, their Icaros, their singing, their ayahuasca culture has become like probably the most well-known globally. So for example, let's say you have a tumor or something. The tumor is the physical, the material manifestation of that illness. But preceding that is some sort of an energetic imbalance, right? It's like, illness certainly does manifest physically, but everything is underpinned by some sort of a relational impact. So everything in the Shipibo cosmovision is understood to be interconnectedness. They call it akinananti, which just means working together, the interconnectedness, the unity of everything. The Quechua people call it aini. And so illness is actually a relational thing. It's not like you have a bad thought and you get sick, but maybe someone else had a bad thought about you, or you walked under a cursed tree, or there was a dart that was thrown at you through this kind of astral realm. And so, yes, you can personally be sick, or let's say, yes, you can personally have toxicity from tobacco, but there's always going to be an explanation that is beyond just the pure chemical material representation of that illness.
How much do you think there's a problem these days with the with the money coming in to ayahuasca?
With
the money, and with people needing to do their own work of protection as an element of ceremony. Certainly there's many people working with lots of integrity still, but there's some people who, there's lots of shamans who are drunk, whose integrity is a little spurious, and especially when there's a lot of outside foreign interest and money coming in. What do you think about that situation? How this evolution of an influence of ayahuasca in the world has come with some natural problems?
Yeah, for sure. You know who said this to me once? Rodrigo. He said, yin yang chow. It's kind of become yin, like my motto, yin yang. So I think that, you can there is certainly darkness kind of eclipsing onto the lightness, but I also see that it's like a dynamic movement. in When Plants Dream, a lot of what I wanted to do was focus specifically on these kind of overlooked aspects of spiritual materialism and this like unique archetype of the pompous neo-shaman who says you're only cool once you've been to an ayahuasca ceremony or whatever this kind of bizarre behavior is. Which is interesting because I think often when people are sort of doing this performative, shamanic, like authoritative dance, to me it indicates a sense of wanting to belong to something. And I think it does represent like, you do want to represent something deeper and like you are connected to the astral bodies and and nature, but like maybe there's a more delicate way to do it. But in terms of like what's actually happening in the jungle, so I work at a retreat center, and we see quite a lot of guests every year. So something that we have to head on confront are the complexities of working with these sacred medicines in an intercultural context when there is a supply and a demand and all of these kind of aspects of commodification that are like inherent to the structure of allowing this medicine to be accessible for wider, groups, basically people who actually need it. And so what I've seen, is that I've actually noticed more of the critical discourse around the globalization of ayahuasca coming from, believe it or not, Western academics, typically like white folks. Whereas when I'm in the jungle and I speak with people there, I find that oftentimes many communities are actually really grateful for the opportunity to actually eke a living out of something that is not extractive, really, at least in comparison to agricultural extraction and petroleum extraction and all these different industries that are really the only lucrative livelihood opportunities for a lot of those people in the jungle. So on one hand, you see there is this kind of like, infiltration of these funky, maybe ill-willed so-called shamans that are coming in and trying to make a buck from the whole thing. But you also find that there are communities who, perhaps for the first time in this story of globalized culture, are being respected and properly remunerated for their ancestral wisdom and traditions. And so it's really like, I think there's a middle path to be walked, and it's not one way or the other.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I went down to Peru once to do a traditional dieta, and at the time I wanted to do something that was traditional, and so I ended up going outside of Tarapoto and working with a shaman who... I just saw the cosmic giggle around this whole thing because I really struggled with the decision about whether to go or not. I went as part of my ex-wife and I's honeymoon. This is what we did with the honeymoon money. It was like, we're going to go do a dieta. Yeah. And we went to this guy who's pretty old. It's kind of washed up. And it was supposed to be just us and the guy who's taking us. And at the last minute, he says, like, I'm bringing a friend. And we felt a little slighted because we're like, well, who's the friend? That's kind of a big deal. And it turned out to be this woman from Boston who is just like the epitome of like a Boston lady. Like, are we going to trip? Like, oh my God, like, are we going to like boff or something? Like, it's just like not at all, quote unquote, sacred, right? And that's who we were like with, 4 days in to get there. And so that was just a struggle and interesting. And then, like, as we're drinking, we ended up not drinking ayahuasca that much. He was more of a vegetalista, and we were working with other plants, and it wasn't very psychoactive. And it was I lost like, I don't know, 10, 15 pounds like in 10 days, and I was exhausted, and it was like more about the bugs and the spiders than it was. It was an amazing experience that has little to do with like internal visions.
Totally.
And it was just felt like this big cosmic joke. It's like you thought it'd be this and that, and you struggled with all these different things, and that's all you're going to do is you're going to face these struggles. We ended up having a really amazing experience a couple weeks later in the Sacred Valley with San Pedro and Cucho down there, and that was just like beautiful. But I was just kind of struck by, he had a son, and I was noticing that the son was supposed to be, I think, sort of learning this and taking on this tradition of his father's as a shaman, and I didn't really see it happening. There's like a breaking down of this lineage of knowledge, and we're at such an interesting place in history where, on one hand, that knowledge is now bigger and more popular and more needed than it's ever been from all over the world. But on the other hand, it's breaking down where there's been a line of thousands of years, and now it's all of a sudden not. How does it translate into the next generation? What is its role for its relevancy as we're moving forward as a people on this world? Have you had any thoughts on that or insights in your own journeys?
Yeah, big time. That's probably the biggest question we have today, because even though there is like a renaissance and a popularity of these substances, there is not like an equal effort to really ensure that those lineages continue within their rightful lineages, right? With the people who have the relationship to the land and speak those languages and have those codes. And whether or not you believe that shamanism is sort of like a blood bound kind of thing, like you need it to be passed on from one generation to another, or you can go to the jungle for 2.5 weeks and get a certificate and then be a shaman, right? That's another question. But I mean, what I've found is that there's this very funny pattern that's going on, and what I'm working on, and what a couple of other people I know are working on. There's one organization called the Shipibo Konibo Center, run by Matteo Norzi. And the organization that I work with, called the Chaikuni Institute, we're basically, putting a lot of attention into intercultural education. So that's really, for example, advocating for indigenous tongues to be spoken in formal academic settings, right? Or encouraging kids to still be proud of their lineages and of their ancestral knowledge. And even with the sequoia, for example, it's ultimately a lot of the kids just still want to chew bubble gum and collect Nikes, and that's just what Western civilization is pointing them towards, and it's the best way to make a living, make a dime. But again, with the global spread of ayahuasca and the international interest in it, the younger generations are seeing, oh, hey, maybe there is something to my parents' weird rituals. Maybe there is something to my grandfather's traditions. And so there is this kind of like feedback loop, this reciprocity that's breathing another wave of enthusiasm into the younger generations. But absolutely, it's super complex. And I mean, I would recommend to anybody who does consider going down to the jungle or doing whatever, to see if the centers that they're going to have some sort of a youth education program. I think that that's like absolutely a vital component to making sure that this work is continued, in the forest.
Do you think it's problematic if people are taking that work out of the forest and around the world, like gringo shamans and so forth? I've met plenty of people who you might think like, oh, what's going on here? But then you learn they went down for like 15 years and they really did it.
Yeah. I you know what? I used to have a bit more of like an orthodox perspective, because when you see really how some of the elders do it in the jungle, you are like, holy smokes, everything else is not even close. But having said that, I have also met people who have really put in the work and who just kind of get it, and who have also, been 15 years in the forest. So I think it's about putting in the work and having the right intention, and ultimately like having people to teach you. I think that anybody really can, as long as you have teachers, because the thing is that the issue comes when people become self-taught, but they don't have anybody a little bit older and a little bit wiser to feed them feedback, honestly, which is when you start to get the grandiose ego and the distorted intentions, and you need somebody to kind of guide you in this, and that's how this stuff works. So I don't think it matters so much the color of your skin as the intention, and really making sure that you have a structure, a learning structure, and maybe an adopted lineage to actually help you.
I would agree.
Mature in it and in a good way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I totally understand that.
Because you can't learn it on your own in that way. I mean, you can intuitively get these things, but you need feedback. You need to get your ass kicked if you're not doing a good job, right? Like, it's just kind of how it works.
Well, and why do you think, stepping back from it all, it's rising in its popularity and use now in the last few decades?
Well, I'm sure you have a couple of interesting thoughts on that too.
We're here to talk to you. Yeah. Well, it's not an easy experience, right? And one thing that's also really interesting about ayahuasca in particular is that it's almost always inside the container of a ceremony, which makes it pretty singular. You look at mushrooms, for instance, psilocybin. It's just about the opposite. Almost everyone's done it outside the container of a ceremony, and very few people have really sat with it in that way. So why is it that ayahuasca has stayed lockstep with this tradition of the thing that seems to make it work so well? The ceremony is, I think, what it is. That is the medicine. That along with the song, the music, the Icaros, and they say that too. But nonetheless, it doesn't necessarily explain why it's come out of the jungle into something that's a very difficult experience, yet rewarding at times around the world.
Yeah. I think there are a few answers to that, and I think that they're all connected. I mean, speaking for myself, I think we are hungry for initiation, and initiation happens best in the container of ceremony, right? In this space where time is suspended. It's sort of like a punctuation mark in the endless run-on sentence of life. It's this liminal space where you can reflect on your past and intentionally craft your future. And we do not have those in our culture anymore. They've been cannibalized by consumer culture. And I think that this is one of the unique vestiges of ceremony that can be understood for the people of our time. And not only that, because there are other ceremonies that exist that are that still have integrity and form, that are, that were developed by other indigenous peoples. But I think that there is kind of a meta narrative to there being a plant from the Amazon, right? This sort of heart, the proverbial heart and lungs of the rainforest, which you could, if you adopt like a fantastical lens, say perhaps is communicating to us. And I think that many of us want an enchanted perspective of life again. We want to feel connected. We want to know the name of the trees. We want to know when the leaves blossom. We want to feel that state of wholeness again. But when none of us have time, we're all so busy. So to have not only the substance, but the substance that requires that ceremony to open up is the perfect unison, is the perfect union that allows for that real transcendent experience to happen. And then maybe that's a gateway, right? Maybe that's a gateway into meditation or the creation of new rituals, new rites of passage. But I think that's why ayahuasca specifically has been so popular, really has exploded in the past 2 years. Yeah.
And medicine of that intensity could just be sort of also meeting a symptom of the intensity of the times that we're in. We need some strong hits, and people need something to really break through the shell and the hypnotism of the spell that they're in, which is deep.
It is deep. Oh, wow. Yeah, you're right. Exactly. Yeah. Zen. Good luck getting people to commit to that long and strong path. Yeah. And so in a way you can say psychedelics are like a shortcut, and maybe that's one way to look at it. For some people it's also a lifestyle, and it's a lineage, it's a path that goes deeper and deeper. In my case it is, but for some people it really is this what happens, like an electric shock to the heart or something when you get in the emergency room and they wake you up. Wake up, human. Feel your body. Feel afraid. Feel sad, just allow it to be you, allow you to be you for a second here. Okay, good. Onwards.
It's amazing that sort of the Western idea, we go on this long journey in human history where we go in sort of this Western notions where then we sort of kill everything and dominate everything. And now we're coming back to the things that we tried to destroy and dominate, like the indigenous wisdoms, whether South American or African, or it's like we need to reconnect to our longer lineages to survive. And we see something like this with the COVID situation too, where it seems to be related to a level of like alignment with something or misalignment. I don't have my finger on what all that is. I don't know if any of us do to know like really what's occurring yet. But it is something about waking us up from a collective dream. And there's been like multiple crises or things coming into our consciousness, like ayahuasca itself is a way of waking up from a certain kind of dream and taking charge. I mean, look, I don't see anything wrong with a shortcut. It's like shortcuts to me are just that. It's a shortcut. It's a way to do something more efficiently or faster. And Terence McKenna would always talk about, you don't have to sweep the ashram for 20 years necessarily. You don't have to.
Yeah. Right. That's one way. Yeah, totally. Yeah. I mean, I've been thinking about COVID a lot, actually, because, everyone and their mom has some sort of a deep, important
people
statement
talk about.
About the nature of reality and COVID. But having said that, I mean, some things that because I was in the Peruvian Amazon as COVID was like looming over and starting to impact the communities there. So I was lucky to like speak with some of the indigenous healers and hear their perspectives of viruses and pandemics and things, which is very
What do they
interesting.
think?
Well, again, like remembering that illness is an interconnected phenomenon. I think honestly, the most interesting thing I got out of it was like when they pointed to the coronavirus, they were pointing to the air. They were pointing up and around, kind of speaking about it as this thing that was like out there, which we do too, but like we tend to locate these things in here, right? And I mean, for me, the main thing that I think the real trippy goggles that we're putting on with COVID is being dramatically awakened to the interconnectedness of everything. Like, even if you're in the supermarket, you are seeing these nefarious molecules floating around in the air. And then it's like and this is the most majestic display of the butterfly effect we've seen in our civilization, probably the grandest scale of it. Some animal tortured somewhere in China, whether or not it's in a laboratory or in a market, I'll let the jury decide. But still, it's like, that effect has rippled into collapsing our global economy. And I think just those hard material facts are enough to make us go, oh, damn, like we are really mortal. We are really, really connected. And I think that that's not something that we felt for a long time. It's certainly our politics and our rhetoric and just the way that we in mainstream culture talk. We don't acknowledge that. So now we have to. And I think that there's a lot of beauty in that. Yeah.
Totally. The psychedelic journey, that's often what you're facing, is a kind of reckoning with death and life and birth. And that's sort of the heart of the experience, is like your humanity. And that seems to wake you up into some kind of aliveness. And that's definitely, I think, what a lot of the reaction to COVID is about how close are you to death? The one thing we all share, the one thing we all know, but yet we don't know always what to do with that. And we live in a society that wants to fight against it, hide it, not talk about it, not at least most our society. So
yeah, totally. And on the flip side too, I'm realizing at a certain point in quarantine, being like, is a life living in fear worth living at all? Right? I think some of us are getting to the point now where we understand that it's important to flatten the curve. We understand these things, and we're also realizing the things that matter, the things that deeply nourish our souls.
Yeah.
Connection, touch, laugh, warmth, dance, play, all these things,
It's a giant ceremony that we're going through, really.
Is it, or what? Jeez, what a ceremony it is. It really is. Yeah, it really is. I mean, yeah, certainly it takes on many different colors and shapes and hues for me. Every day is a bit different and it gets deeper and deeper. But In a way, I mean, I feel it's funny because I feel in some way, again, humans are like meaning-making machines. We can't help but create stories that to help us make sense of all of this. So one of the stories that I'm telling myself or that I entertain is that this is like a very gentle dress rehearsal. This could have been Ebola. This could have been something far more dramatic and unsightly. This could have
Spanish
been
flu. You bled from your eyes, I think, and your ears. I mean, it was like grotesque.
Grotesque, plague.
Yeah.
Like we had some rough moments in human civilization. So I think, but also understanding that we look back on that, like those kind of scarier iterations of those viruses were mutations. So they were already after they were in the space for like 6 months to a year. So we don't know how things will look, but nevertheless, I can't help but feel like this is, of all of the possible things that could have pulled the speeding race car of civilization into the pit to get its tires changed for a second, it's like the gentlest way that we could have been pulled in. It could have happened a million other ways, but I think all of us in a sense felt like something's gotta stop. Something's gotta stop. And like, here we are, we've stopped.
Yeah, no one could stop it. Like there was no, ironically, way to make the collective decision happen. Even though it's like, we could just do that. It's shown us how quickly we can collectively decide and change things, how rapidly, within days, we can change huge systems if we just decide to. We have to have the motivation. The glue has to be there to hold us all together.
Totally. Yeah, collect. And we are bound together in our humanity. This is like an undiscriminating force that has the same impact on all of us. Pretty amazing. Yeah. Right. I mean, obviously, given I must acknowledge that there are huge socioeconomic differences in how people are impacted and not impacted. But generally speaking, yes. Yeah.
So, Sophia, are you hopeful?
Always. I mean, always and not. I think, Donna Haraway, she wrote Cyborg Manifesto. She's a great thinker.
I don't know her.
She's wonderful, Donna Haraway. And she has a couple great quotes like make kin, not children. Like there. One quote of hers was something a lot to the effect of abandon hope. And I found this quite interesting because hope is, in that respect, like hope is some sort of an entity out there that one hopes for without actually taking action. Right? It's like a thing out there. If you hope for something, it doesn't necessarily imply that you're working towards something or you're ensuring that it's happening. Okay, but anyway, that tangent aside, I am hopeful. I am hopeful. I heard once from an elder something I really loved. She said, "Es tu decreto ser feliz." It is your decree to be happy. And I found that very moving and very profound, in that if we have the resources and the capacity and the ability to be happy, then it is our decree to be happy. Because if we're not happy, who will be happy? And I think that obviously without bypassing the reality of sadness and grief and depression and all of these things that move through us, it's like if we can be happy, we must be happy. And so I'm hopeful that, that spirit of happiness and joy can be found in whatever circumstances we find ourselves in. But you can check in with me in a few months.
Do you think it's a choice, happiness, or do you think it's a more circumstance?
It's mixed, again, yin yang. But I do find myself in many, many moments of the day really stopping and saying, hey, whoa, are you like in this situation? Is this situation of your making, or is it real? And often kind of like pulling apart this material reality and like this kind of the monkey in the cage story that's going on. I can clearly see that that happiness can very much be created. Obviously, recognizing Maslow's hierarchy of needs, knowing that we have basic needs that need to be met. When those needs are met, then yes, I think it's very much a question of will.
I love that. Well, Sophia Rokhlin, thank you very much for taking some time with us. It's great to get to meet you and connect, continue to let those connections connect. It seems like we had a few already.
Yeah, let's see where it takes us next. I love this orbiting movement we're in. It's so cool. It was a pleasure to be here.
Thank you so much, Sophia, for joining us. It was an honor and a pleasure. You know, when we scheduled this, she was down in Peru, and it was before COVID, and it was kind of hard to know when we could get a chance to talk. And then COVID happened, and she had to come back, and so I'm glad we could make it happen. And I was in Boulder, and long story short, thanks, Sophia, for your patience, and I'm looking forward to chatting again. This track you're hearing in the background is called Carry Water, and it is from the album Orbits. Thanks again for reviewing the podcast. Give it 5 stars if you get a moment. That does just take seconds, and you can do it more than once. You can also leave a written comment more than once, and it makes a big difference for my morale and also for other people who have a lot of options out there and might give them that little inkling they need to say, hey, I'll check out what this podcast is all about. And that's all we have to do. The rest is up to the universe, and maybe they'll hear what they need to hear. Either way, you keep walking your walk. Don't take any shit, folks. But if you do it with grace.